Have you ever wondered what the real differences is between a simple fraud and one of those massive federal racketeering cases? Well, believe it or not, the answer isn't some super complicated legal maze. It actually boils down to a single, really powerful word. We're going to crack the code on what that word is by digging into a fascinating court case that totally changed the game for federal law. So, let's get right into it. So, what is the line? When does a regular local crime suddenly blow up into a huge federal investigation? To be more specific, what's the magic ingredient that turns a simple fraud case into the kind of organized crime that brings down the full weight of federal racketeering charges? And here it is. The entire thing hinges on this one word: pattern. The very specific legal definition of pattern is literally the key that unlocks some of the most serious federal charges out there, especially under laws like the RICO Act. So understanding what the courts really mean by this word is absolutely crucial.
To really wrap our heads around this, we need a real-world example. So let's dive into a story that, at first glance, just seems like a messy family fight over an inheritance. This is the case of Grimmet versus Brown. So here's how it all went down. It started pretty simply. A wealthy person passes away, leaves a will, but pretty soon after, a group of relatives, we'll call them the Grimmet party, started claiming the will was a total fraud. They ended up suing the executor, a guy named Brown, saying there was a whole conspiracy going on. This thing escalated, and I mean it really escalated, all the way to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals back in 1996. And this is where we get to the heart of the fight. The Grimmet family was arguing, hey, this wasn't just one bad act. It was a whole string of connected crimes, a calculated plot to steal what was rightfully ours. On the other side, Brown's defense was basically, whoa, hold on. These are just separate arguments about who gets what. This is not some organized criminal operation. So who was right? To sort this all out, the court had to tackle that big question we started with. How do you decide if a bunch of separate acts actually form a pattern? Well, the answer lies in a really important two-part legal test. See, in the eyes of the law, a pattern of racketeering isn't just, a random bunch of crimes. To actually be called a pattern, the criminal acts have to meet two very specific legal requirements. Let's break down exactly what those are. Here it is. This is the simple but incredibly powerful framework the court uses. First, you have to prove there's a relationship between the crimes. And second, you have to show continuity. For a pattern to legally exist, you have to have both. It's not one or the other, it's an all-or-nothing deal. Okay, let's start with part one, relationship. This is all about connecting the dots. Are the crimes actually related? Do they have the same purpose, the same victims, or use similar methods? In the Grimmet case, the question was pretty straightforward. Were all these alleged fraudulent acts part of one big plan to control the inheritance? Then we get to step two, continuity. And honestly, this is often the real game changer. The key question here is this: do these crimes suggest an ongoing threat? Is this a one-and-done scheme with a clear finish line? Or is this just how this person or group operates, meaning they pose a threat to do it again in the future? All right, so now that we're armed with that two-part test, let's jump back into our story and see exactly how the court applied this framework to the facts of the Grimmet's case. This was the million-dollar question the Ninth Circuit had to answer. For the Grimmet family's racketeering claim to succeed, the court had to find that the fraud had both a clear relationship and proven continuity. And remember, one without the other just doesn't cut it. And you know what? The court's own words tell the whole story, loud and clear. In their official opinion, they wrote this: the goal was singular, to defraud the rightful heirs. The threat ended when this goal was accomplished. Wow, that one sentence pretty much tells you everything you need to know about how they were thinking. And so, based on that crystal clear logic, the court's verdict was decisive. They found that, from a legal standpoint, there was no pattern of racketeering activity. So let's just recap the court's scorecard here. Did the acts have a relationship? Yes, absolutely. The court totally agreed they were all connected to the one goal of getting control of the will. But did they have continuity? And that's where they drew the line. No. The court's reasoning was that the whole scheme had a clear finish line. Once the inheritance was locked down, the crime was over. There was no threat of it happening again, and without that future threat, there could be no pattern. Okay, so you might be thinking, why are we talking about a family squabble from 1996? Well, it's because the court's decision in this case didn't just end one lawsuit. It created a powerful legal precedent that we still use today. The Grimmet case is so important because it drew a critical line in the sand. It gave courts a clear, logical way to tell the difference between a criminal plan that's self-contained and a true, ongoing racketeering enterprise. The legacy of this decision is huge. First off, it made it super clear that to charge someone with racketeering, there has to be a real threat of future crime. And that's vital because it stops every single complicated fraud from automatically becoming a massive federal case. It set up that clear two-part test for all the lower courts to follow. And to this day, it's still a major precedent cited in legal argument.
So this leaves us with a really big question for our time. We've seen how this relationship and continuity test worked for a paper, back in the 90s. But how does that same test hold up when you're dealing with the complex, ongoing, and often borderless crimes of the digital age? That's a huge challenge the legal world is grappling with right now, and frankly, the answer is still being written.